Hi there, Michael here. Today's video is the second in a two-part series where I talk about the process I used to create the music video Through the Mystic Green. What is unique about that music video is that it was created with the help of artificial intelligence, both in terms of the music as well as the animated visuals. But it was not done in the way most people think of generative artificial intelligence. It was not a put in a prompt and generate the final output situation. Rather, it was a creative process that utilized generative artificial intelligence as a productivity assistant. In the first part, I talked extensively about what that means and why I think this is important. And I'm not going to repeat this here, but if you have not seen that first part of this series, I highly recommend. In fact, I would go as far as to say that I urge you to watch that first video in order to understand the full context. Generative artificial intelligence is a touchy topic, and most people seem to react primarily emotionally instead of seeing it as it really is a productivity tool, nothing more and nothing less. And with that out of the way, let's jump into the second part of the series. In this part, I want to explain the workflow I used for creating the visuals. The particular challenge here is that the video generation models treat every shot as a self-contained video. It therefore takes some effort to generate a sequence of shots that have consistency in visual design, art style, character design, and pretty much everything else that is important for telling a story. So let's get started. In order to better understand what this music video is about, I'm going to play it in its full length. If you've already seen the music video or are not interested in watching it in its entirety, feel free to jump ahead. I'll leave a timestamp in the description. And one final comment, which I also made in the first part of the series and which I think is especially important in this video. Although I'm quite knowledgeable about all the technical aspects in the traditional animation production workflow, I am by no means an animation expert. What you're going to see is not the work of a professional animator. I understand the details of the technology on a conceptual level, but I have never really created an actual animation before myself. So take this into account when watching the following music video. And with that being said, here we are, Through the Mystic Green.
The trees are whispering a secret code, a path ahead where dreams explode. With every step the shadows sway, guided by light that leads the way. Through the mystic green I go, where the rivers sing and the wild winds blow. Every
So this was Through the Mystic Green, and as I already said in my last week's video, if you've enjoyed that music piece, do me a favor and give this video a like, and maybe also the original music video. I'm going to leave a link to that video in the description below. Now in this video I want to talk about the video generation, so the animation and how I actually generated that animation. I'm not going to talk about the music. Once again, if you're interested in that, watch last week's video. There I talk in great detail about how I created that music piece. And once again, this was not a single shot approach. It's not something that you simply ask the AI to do and that it does it for you. It's actually much more of a remixing process. And if you're interested in that, once again, last week's video. Now, when it comes to the video generation, the main challenge is really character consistency and consistency in general. So also consistency of the art style, for example. And the reason for that is quite simply that the video generation model has very limited information about the video, the entire video. It only knows about that particular shot that you're currently working on, and it treats that particular shot as a self-contained video. It has no clue what happened before. It has no clue what happened after. It doesn't really know how the art style evolved. It doesn't know what the character is, doesn't know different types of characters. It essentially has no clue about the overall kind of ambience, the overall art style of everything that you are going to create. Every shot is a self-contained video, and you therefore need to find a way to create consistency by giving the artificial intelligence enough information in each individual shot that it, in the end, is able to create something that has a reasonable amount of consistency throughout the entire video. Now, when I approached this problem, the first thing that I thought I'm going to do is I'm going to simply ask ChatGPT to create a character sheet showing the main character that I wanted to have from different angles, from the front to from the back. So essentially the same thing that animators would use. And then create a style sheet that tells the artificial intelligence on what type of animation style I'm aiming at, or what exactly I want to actually accomplish, and what the character really is, and how old she is, and essentially her entire demeanor and everything. So really a style sheet. And then use that style sheet and the character sheet together and feed that into ChatGPT to allow ChatGPT to create individual frames that I could then use as the starting points for my videos, for my individual shots. So in essence, what I wanted to do is I wanted to create these storyboard frames through using a character style sheet and a general style sheet, and then combine those and have ChatGPT create a character. And the original idea was that ChatGPT should be able to do that in a relatively consistent manner. However, as it turns out, while there is a little bit of consistency in there, it is not entirely consistent. So I can show you a couple of examples here when I did that. So this was one example of the character. Then here we have another example. Now they do look similar, but they are just dissimilar enough so that when you run that through a video generation, it looks off. So it did not really work that well, unfortunately. It would have been nice if that would have been possible, because that would have allowed me to be a little bit more descriptive with the story that I wanted to tell. So what I ended up doing is, instead of creating these storyboard frames within ChatGPT directly, I actually used Photoshop and I composited them. So I had a couple of shots of the main character that looked reasonably consistent. I had that from the front, from the back, from the side, and so forth. And then I created storyboard frames with Photoshop, where I put that character, composited that character into a scenery, and then kind of used that as the storyboard frames for the video generation. Now, unfortunately, by doing that, what I had to do is I had to scrap the first couple of seconds in each individual shot, and that was simply because each individual shot would start with the same pose of the character. And that obviously didn't that was not something I wanted to achieve. So I had to actually always cut a couple of seconds at the very beginning. So the frames that I actually fed the video models were frames that were a couple of seconds before the actual storyboard frame, if that makes sense. But the result of that was that it limited my ability to use the different video models. I originally wanted to use Veo 3. Now Veo 3 can create very, very good video that is about 8 seconds long. And I did a couple of tests that were really satisfactory. I kind of really created a couple of really, really nice animations. But unfortunately, 8 seconds was just not enough, because in order to achieve consistency, once again, I had to create a storyboard frame that was a couple of seconds before that shot actually started. And that meant that from these 8 seconds, usually only 3 to 4 to 5 seconds maximum were left. that I could actually use. And that was not enough in order to tell that story. And it particularly was not enough to actually tell it in a way that was financially kind of useful, because I would have needed so many different shots that it would actually have been quite expensive to do that. And I, quite frankly, didn't want to do it that way. So what I ended up deciding is going with Kling instead, Kling 2.0. And the reason, once again, is because Kling is able to generate 10 seconds, and these 2 additional seconds were enough. So essentially, with a 10-second clip, if I scrap the first 3-4 seconds, I still have a solid 6-7 seconds left that I can use, and this is essentially what I ended up doing. Now with Kling, what I did is I did not really use the high-end Kling model. The reason for that is because it, quite frankly, was too expensive. I needed to create about 400 iterations, and each iteration costs money, so I needed to kind of balance that a little bit in order to make it not too expensive. And I ended up using the fast model, Kling 2.1 fast, which quite frankly was good enough for everything that I wanted to do. I had a couple of shots where I tried the master model, so the expensive model, but the added quality that created was not really good enough to kind of justify that additional cost. The cost benefit was simply not there. Now, one thing that has been a little bit of an issue with Kling is that Kling had a tendency for a very particular art style. So when I gave it the initial frames, what would usually happen is that Kling would turn that character into a 3-dimensional character. So I started out with something that is completely 2-dimensional, and my original idea was to actually have a 2D animation. But Kling always made that character 3-dimensional, so I ended up deciding to make that my art style. So the character was 3D, the background was 2D, and I ended up sticking with that and took Kling as my collaborative partner. Kling wanted to do a 3D character, let's do a 3D character. The other thing that was really interesting was that I wasn't really able to follow a predetermined story structure, simply because Kling would usually deviate. So the video models that we currently have are not really very good in adhering to prompts. So if you tell the video model that you want that character to do something, it quite often will not do that, will do something completely different. And therefore, generating a story or kind of a consistent story based on an existing story structure or even a script is actually really, really difficult, because the video model is actually fighting you against what you want, and it kind of has its own mind, really. And I ended up really following the basic idea that Bob Ross had with his painting classes. It ended up being really a collection of happy accidents. So I asked Kling to do certain things. It would sometimes do them. Sometimes it would do something completely different. But what it did sometimes was actually quite interesting. So if it was something that I actually liked, I kept it and just kind of evolved the story that way. So it became more of a kind of, I hate the term vibe working kind of way. So I really kind of went with the flow and had that story develop in a flow state. Now, I'm not really a storyteller, and my understanding is that if you're really passionate about storytelling, that this is really not something that you want to have. You actually want to really plan out your story and make sure that everything follows a very particular structure to have a consistent story with a nice story arc. I do know that some novelists actually work more with the flow. When they start working on a novel, they quite often don't know how that novel is going to end. But here in this particular case with the video models, you don't really have a choice. So or at least I didn't really have a choice. If you have a lot of money and a lot of time and you can create hundreds of iterations and hundreds of generations, then maybe you can kind of create a story that really follows your predetermined script. But this was not something I could do with the limited amount of time and the limited amount of money that I was willing to spend. So I let Kling really kind of guide me through that process, and it became really more of a flow working or vibe working kind of thing. And for that reason, there's also a couple of things that a lot of people have criticized in terms of how the story actually develops. It isn't really a story, but in the end, it's a music video. So I think it's good enough. And for the experiment, I'm actually quite happy with what it created. It created something that I think kind of demonstrates the capabilities and also the limitations of current video generation. Now, when it comes to happy accidents, there's actually one very, very happy accident in that particular music video, and that is when the girl kind of grabs the flower and the hair opens up. Now, first of all, you might have noticed that that shot is actually longer than 10 seconds, and that is because I actually composited two shots next to each other. So those are actually two video generations that are cleverly put together. And the way you usually do that is that you take the frame of the last one and kind of use that as the starting point for the next one. And then you need to sort of figure out to kind of make sure that the camera movement is not too janky and everything kind of has a certain smoothness to it. But what I wanted to have in that particular shot was I wanted to somehow show that the girl gains confidence. So there's something mystical going on that now increases her confidence. She's no longer scared. She's now becoming a leader. And I didn't quite know how to do that. So what I did is I simply asked Kling, the girl is becoming confident. And that's really everything that I put into the prompt. And what Kling did is it opened up her hair. And I thought that was such a kind of happy accident because it really kind of, if you look at that particular scene, I think, at least in my opinion, it brings that idea of gaining confidence across. It suddenly opens her up. And that was really a happy accident. So once again, kind of working with video models at the moment, at least, is really a sequence of happy accidents. That's really what it is. So if you are a video maker, a filmmaker, and you want to work with generative artificial intelligence, at the moment at least, you need to allow yourself to be guided by the artificial intelligence. Don't try to force certain things onto the AI that the AI doesn't want to do. Now, this is probably going to change in the future, but at the moment at least, this is the way to go. And this is essentially what I did in order to end up with this music video. In the first part of this series, I shared some general thoughts about the use of artificial intelligence in creative production processes. I'm not going to repeat that here, but I strongly encourage you to go back and watch the first part if you have not already seen that. In a nutshell, I think it is crucial to understand that working with AI is not like putting in a prompt and then getting the output, and that's it. I do realize that many people are working that way and are even advocating for using artificial intelligence that way, but if you think that is what artificial intelligence is all about, you are spectacularly mistaken. Generative artificial intelligence is about using automation for certain parts of the production process, and that can include assisting in the actual process of creation and any knowledge work around it. The emphasis here is on assisting. It is a productivity tool, nothing more and nothing less. It does not make human creativity obsolete, but it does level the playing field for anybody interested in creating content. Well, that's everything for today. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments or join a free Discord server. The invite link is in the description below. And don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on all things Dolby Atmos and immersive audio. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.